Most gardeners ruin their soil biology without realizing it by overfeeding plants with bottled nutrients and starving the microbes that actually make nutrients usable. The result looks like progress at first, fast green growth, quick response. But over time you get weaker plants, nutrient lockout, pest pressure and soil that stops improving no matter how much compost you add. Fermented leaf water is one of the oldest fixes for that problem, and it still works because it feeds the system, not just the plant. Before we go deep, if you care about growing food that actually improves year after year instead of burning out your beds, subscribe to the Farm Logic channel. Everything here is built around methods that survive real gardens, not theory. Why most natural fertilizers fail in real gardens. A lot of advice around plant teas and natural feeds sounds good, but falls apart in practice. People throw random leaves into water, let it rot, pour it on plants, and then blame fermentation when things smell bad or growth stalls. So the real issue isn't actually fermentation, it's when things get out of hand, leading to uncontrolled decay and poor ratios. When that happens, you're not really feeding the microbes anymore. You're just creating anaerobic sludge that ends up tying up nitrogen and honestly stressing your plant roots. Fermented leaf water, when it's done properly, is really a controlled microbial extraction. You know, ancient gardeners didn't have access to lab tests, but they paid close attention to what worked. They kept reusing those methods that, season after season, consistently strengthened their crops. I started testing this myself years ago, in raised beds that had kind of plateaued, in backyard soil that was struggling with nutrient cycling, and even in hydroponic systems where most folks assume fermentation doesn't really belong. The thing is, the results were consistent as long as the process was kept tight. So, what fermented leaf water actually provides to plants is a bit different, you know. This isn't compost tea, and it isn't fertilizer in the conventional sense. Fermented leaf water extracts soluble minerals, plant hormones, amino acids, and, well, microbial metabolites from fresh green material. Leaves already contain the nutrients plants need, but they're locked inside cell walls. Fermentation, though, breaks those walls gently and releases nutrients in forms that roots and microbes recognize immediately. So, when applied to soil, it actually feeds bacteria and fungi first, which then, shuttle nutrients to plant roots. And when used as a foliar spray, it delivers micronutrients and growth signals directly through leaf pores. In hydroponics, it functions more like a biological stimulant than a nutrient source, really improving root health and resilience rather than replacing your base solution. The leaves you choose, well, they matter more than most people think. Not all leaves are equal. Fast-growing green plants produce the most useful fermented extract. Comfrey, nettle, pumpkin vines, sweet potato leaves, bean leaves, and young grass all work extremely well. I avoid woody plants and anything with thick, leathery leaves because they ferment slowly and unevenly. For backyard gardens, I usually harvest about 1 kilogram of fresh leaves. That's roughly a tightly packed bucket. Chop them lightly, not into pulp, just enough to break surface area. Stuff them into a container until it's about 2/3 full, then add non-chlorinated water until the leaves are just submerged. Rainwater is ideal, but tap water left out overnight works fine. Getting fermentation right instead of letting it rot. Here's where most people mess this up. You do not want air constantly mixing into this brew. That creates aerobic decay, not fermentation. Once submerged, press the leaves down with a clean stone or weight so they stay underwater. So, seal the container loosely, tight enough to limit oxygen but loose enough to let gas escape. I usually use containers with lids cracked open just slightly. Within about 24 to 48 hours in warm conditions, you'll notice bubbles forming. The smell should be sour-sweet, sort of like silage or fermented greens, not like rotten eggs. If it smells foul, just throw it out and start over. Good fermentation smells alive, not dead. In most climates, the sweet spot is around 7 to 10 days. Cooler weather might take closer to 2 weeks. When the bubbling slows and the liquid turns a dark green-brown, it's ready. So, here's how I dilute and apply it in real gardens. This concentrate is honestly quite strong. Using it straight is actually one of the fastest ways to stress your plants. For soil drenching in raised beds or in-ground gardens, I usually dilute it at about 1 part fermented leaf water to 10 parts clean water. For a standard watering can, that's roughly 1 litre of concentrate, then topped up to 10 litres total. I always apply it directly to moist soil, not dry. Dry soil just wastes microbial activity. In raised beds, I focus on the root zone rather than soaking leaves. Once every 2 to 3 weeks during active growth is enough. And, more is not better. For foliar feeding, I dilute further, 1 to 20. Spray early morning or late afternoon when leaf pores are open. This is especially effective for leafy greens, tomatoes during vegetative growth and stressed plants recovering from transplant shock. So, using fermented leaf water in hydroponic systems, well, most hydro growers assume anything fermented will absolutely ruin their system. But honestly, that's only true if you just dump it into the reservoir like a regular nutrient solution. I don't do that. Instead, what I do is strain the liquid extremely well and then dilute it, sometimes as much as 1 to 50 or even 1 to 100. After that, I'll apply it as a root zone flush or a foliar spray, not as a constant feed. In NFT or DWC systems, I'll add just a small amount once every 2 weeks and, monitor dissolved oxygen closely. What I see consistently is improved root branching, thicker root hairs, and reduced transplant stress. It doesn't replace nutrients, but it makes plants use what's already there more efficiently. Why this works better than many store-bought inputs. Bottled inputs are designed for predictability, not long-term soil health. Fermented leaf water adapts to your environment because it's built from plants already thriving in your conditions. You're recycling local biology back into the system. I've seen beds that stalled for years start producing darker green foliage and stronger stems after, about 2 months of regular application, not because of nitrogen spikes, but because nutrient cycling finally woke up. The trade-off is control. You can't micromanage ppm values with this. But if you care about resilient plants, flavor, and soil that improves instead of degrades, this trade-off is honestly worth it. Common mistakes that quietly sabotage results. Using old, dry, or diseased leaves weakens the fermentation. Letting the brew go anaerobic for too long, it actually turns it toxic. Applying it to dry soil, wastes most of its benefit. And using it weekly like a fertilizer, honestly, overwhelms the system. Ancient gardeners didn't chase schedules. They watched plants. When growth slowed or leaves lost color, they fed the soil, not the symptom. Now, let's talk about how this fits into a serious gardening system. Fermented leaf water honestly works best when you use it alongside things like compost, mulch, and, minimal soil disturbance. So it's not a replacement, it's a multiplier. In small backyard gardens, it really stretches those limited compost supplies. In raised beds, it keeps microbial life active, even between top dressings. And in hydroponics, it adds a bit of biological depth to what can otherwise be pretty sterile systems. This is honestly one of those methods that looks way too simple until you use it correctly, and then, well, you see the difference across seasons. If this kind of practical, experience-tested knowledge helps you grow better food, go ahead and subscribe to the Farm Logic channel and share this video with someone who's, really serious about their garden. Better harvests don't come from more products, they come from understanding how plants and soil actually work together.